do you have any broad prophecies or anything about what the next 5, 10, 20 years of the future of video game research for therapeutics is going to be like?
Oh yeah. I mean, that's what I like to do the most. And it's what I sort of feel like I'm best at, is imagining the future and
Okay,
working
cool.
towards that future. There was a time that what we just talked about in the present was my future vision 15 years ago of a game approved through the FDA. And so whereas my next 10 or 15 years is, that's what I spend most of, that's my fun time, is thinking about that and then trying to implement it. And we have a lot of those research studies begun that hopefully will be like the neuroracer study from a decade ago, and will set us on the path of what the next level of all this is. So I will try to do this in a concise way. What we've been talking about are closed loop interventions that gather data about you in the moment, that then feed back an environment consisting of rewards, challenges, and stimuli that move your brain to some other place. And it could be all sorts of different mechanics to accomplish that. So the mechanics might be ones of meditation or rhythm and music. We have games that involve physical fitness integrated with cognitive challenges. We have navigation games and virtual reality and, head-mounted displays. And so, but the underlying core principle of design is the same. So let's start with that premise, that data about you flows into a processor that then updates your environment in such a way that over time changes your brain because of plasticity. Right? That's the underlying framework of everything that we've ever built, including what Achilles' game is. Where do we go from that? Well, you could move on both sides of the closed loop. So you could feed in much richer or real-time comprehensive data about you than just what Achilles does, which is your performance outcome, right? Like how fast you're responding. It's using the accelerometer, it's using the tap screen, like great sensors to pick up your performance. But, a lot of processing occurs before those outcomes that are valuable data that we're not accessing. So we have a program at Neuroscape called MMBS, Multimodal Biosensing, where we hook up I think we're approaching 180 electrodes, capturing data from body and brain with an emphasis on signal processing and machine learning to try to make interpretable, real-time, actionable signals about your state, your arousal, your valence, your attention, your awareness, to really be able to decode these states so that is the input arm to the closed loop, right? So that's the science fiction sounding future of what the input arm to the closed loop looks like. The output arm of the closed loop is not just looking down at your mobile phone, but being in a full sensory immersive environment where the environment is real and more engaging and more updated. And that is what we've built also. We have a full sensory immersion lab at Neuroscape now. And so the future is that the closed loop will be much, much richer data about you in the moment, feeding a processor that then will put you in an environment that's much more immersive in real world. And the hypothesis is that we will have much greater effects of changing all these aspects of your cognition, further pushing the limitations of plasticity. So this is what I mean when I say, have we really tried all the things? Like, has anyone tried what I just described? No.
Absolutely.
No one has. And so that's what we're building. And that's what I think the 10-year vision is of this technology.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that sounds so cool. I love to hear it. And then again, maybe I should add a caveat to what I said earlier. What these researchers seem to believe was that no interventions up to this point had demonstrated that intelligence or personality could really shift. But I don't think they were saying it was impossible. It just hasn't been done yet. And they're hoping that it could be.
There are people that seem to say it's impossible, so that's maybe why I have some of that in my rhetoric. Is that I hear that sometimes, and I'm like, how do you know that? And but yes, and also we're not just talking about general intelligence here. We're talking about very specific aspects of cognition that I have become convinced are malleable.
Mm. And maybe just to summarize, to make sure that I understood the two ways of that you're hoping things will change or expecting things to change are we're going to have improved sensors that are going to collect more data for input, and then on the other end is really improving the immersive experience. But then the third thing that didn't get mentioned is we have to develop the software to take advantage of these things.
Exactly. And one big part of that third thing is AI.
Oh, cool. Tell me more.
So, so imagine you have the situation that I just described, where you have 180 electrodes of data with the most advanced sensors and signal processing that exists, right? We got like NVIDIA working on it, which is, has been a collaborator in the past. And we're really able to still work to collect data that's so rich in real time. And let's say we have the ability to present an environment that is completely immersive, that's like holodeck, right? It feels real, right? So both of those things haven't happened, but let's say they do happen. How are we going to manage the communication between this input arm and this output arm? And that's where software, lots of software advances, but not the least of which is machine learning, will help on both sides of it. So machine learning can help us interpret this data. I sort of call that interpretive AI. I don't know if that term exists, but I use that term. So the goal is it's not generative AI. It's not creating anything. It's just trying to say, is this person aroused or sedated? Is this person happy or sad, or plus valence, negative valence? Is their attention internal or external? We need interpretive AI and machine learning tools to understand, because this data is so immense and so dynamic and so rich that it's just beyond any analytical approach that we really have right now. So that's a use of AI. Just I'm slipping back between ML and AI because they become so interchangeable. But that's what I mean by AI here, is that we need to advance our analytical and algorithmic capacities to interpret the data. Then, how do we present these immersive worlds? Do we have like just hundreds of artists and musicians working on narratives, and they're constantly updating the environment, and like they're just pulling from asset pools all the time, which is sort of what we do now? Or do we use the future of generative AI to create immersive environments driven by interpretive AI data sets? So that is the third component of it, is like two bi-directional AI acting to couple the closed loop input and output arm.
Yeah, so cool. And I'm going to raise the ante even further and add a fourth component that is going to be another segue. And so, talked about increasing sensors, improving immersion. So, one we're taking out of the body, we're trying to give back to the body in one way, and then there's AI bridging it. But one thing that you haven't talked about is direct interventions on the brain itself. And there are two ways in which I see you working on this and continuing to work on this in the next 10 to 15 years. One is with non invasive brain stimulation, and then the other is with psychedelics. And maybe we should take those in turn.
Sure. We're reining all the elements of my life and my research, which is great because I don't normally get to go this far in discussion, but it's not all theoretical. All of this research is happening right now at UCSF at Neuroscape. And so what I described to you is all true. So let's just package that up, put that over here. It's going to take us a decade to fully realize that. I'm also interested in how we can use blunter instruments, less precise. The most precise instrument, let me first say that the most precise instrument that we have to improve brain function, I would say, I'm going to go out on a limb and say this, is experience. that we are not capable of activating neural networks in any more selective way than we can do through experience alone. There's no amount of brain stimulation, even invasive brain stimulation. No drug can do it that we've ever seen that activates networks selectively like having an experience does. That's like how our brain works. It's using its own like sort of operating system. And so that's why everything we do is experiential. Everything we do is driven through an interactive, it could be passive experience that's creative. So that's the foundation to everything we do. That's why I sort of frame this as experiential medicine. But I believe that there are blunter instruments that do not have the selectivity of an experience that can heighten the effects. And two of those are non-invasive brain stimulation and molecules, specifically psychedelics. So let's talk about non-invasive brain stimulation. So we have, I don't know if quite a dozen, but close to a dozen now papers, and there are hundreds of others in the literature that show that magnetic and electrical stimulation and all types of electrical stimulation, from random noise to direct currents to alternating currents. Most of our work is with alternating currents applied to the brain, to different brain regions, can heighten plasticity. But it's blunt. It's not specific. It's, sort of affecting like the entire front part of your brain. But what we have shown is that when coupled with an experience, especially a closed loop experience, we can accelerate learning, at least within the domain of that intervention. Whether or not that accelerates transfer effects and leads to longer benefits, that's a question that we're exploring. So that's one way, is that you can do everything that I described before with, and we already have electrodes on you. We could stimulate your brain, let's say with a theta rhythm, like a low, 4 hertz rhythm, alternating across your frontal lobes, and accelerate the outcomes of that experience. That is one area that we're pursuing. But it's a blunt instrument, like I said. We would never do a study of just brain stimulation alone necessarily, at least not in our hands. We'd always couple it with an experience to get the selective network activation during the stimulation. Same thing for psychedelics. I think there's an incredible clinical world that is opened up again, showing all the benefits of both classic psychedelics and things like MDMA and ketamine on many different clinical populations. And I'm very excited about it. We were actually a site in the most recent MAPS trial for MDMA used for PTSD treatment. Jenny Mitchell, who's in our group, was the first author, and that Nature Medicine paper just came out. I'm very excited in general about psychedelics in the clinical domain. But why it's a neuroscape is because it is another, I would say, blunt instrument. And the reason it's blunt is that no one just says, hey, take some psychedelics, see how that works out for you, and call me in a month. Why? Because it's blunt, because you put it in there and into your brain, and the outcomes are highly driven by the experience, by what's going on around you. Are you in a safe place or a threatening place? Are you in nature or not nature? Do you have a facilitator guiding you? Are you listening to music? And that's all evidence that the molecule itself is rather blunt in its actions and needs the guidance of the experience, what's known in the field as set and setting. So how can we now take everything that we've talked about and add psychedelics, maybe in a much lower dose, because we don't need the full perceptual, events to lead to the effects we want. But what would that do to help increase plasticity of the system? So both psychedelics and non-invasive brain stimulation have in common and of interest to us in that they are plasticity inducing. At least that's what I would say the data suggests. And that's why we would couple it with our other system to lead to bigger effects.
One question I have about these two modalities is whether your research suggests why non-invasive brain stimulation or psychedelics have these effects on plasticity.
Yeah, we haven't done a lot of the fundamental work in it, but from the non-invasive brain stimulation, so people would suggest that on the DC side, on the direct current side, it's raising resting membrane depolarization and causing neurons to fire more readily. It's not causing them to fire like TMS does, transcranial magnetic stimulation, but they're more likely to fire, right? Their threshold is now reduced for them to create these responses. And so if you engage in something that is a learning experience that's challenging the brain, the plasticity is induced because the system is sort of at a more dynamic state. Similar explanation has been used on the psychedelic side. And a lot of this is obviously still not known, but there's work in animal models showing increased spine and density in mice under psilocybin exposure. So there are elements of the molecular treatment that also seem to guide the very molecular plasticity mechanisms that lead to um, all sorts of different plasticity markers. A lot of this data has been better defined in animals than in humans, but that is at least mechanistically where those two fields are.